All right. Peace and love, everybody. Hope that you're all doing well out there today. What is today? It's the 24th of October, 2021. And so, our topic for today is dealing with personal transformation, dealing with shadows, particularly your own, and self acceptance. And so, you know, a lot of people are kind of dealing with, you know, well, some people are dealing with it more than others, quite frankly. But a lot of times people find themselves in situations where life can be frustrating. It can be frustrating dealing with things that are going on in the world. It can be frustrating dealing with other people. It can be frustrating dealing with life circumstances. There are a lot of things that can be frustrating, that can be difficult. And the reality is that this is something I've been learning in my own life. The reality is that how sweet your life is, how beautiful your life is, doesn't really depend so much on what's going on with other people, what's going on in terms of external circumstances. Not that we're not affected by those things, because we certainly are. But really, what it really comes down to is what our internal landscape is looking like. And what our internal landscape is really looking like is really based on what's going on in our hearts and what's going on in our minds. Okay, what we're giving energy to, where we're putting our thoughts, where we're putting our attention, the places that we kind of go within ourselves, really deals with and ultimately impacts how we end up experiencing life. And so transformation is really key, necessary, and important in that. And this is really, we're moving into a season right now where transformation is really, really important, valuable, and significant. And hi to you all who are out there, by the way. I don't know who all is viewing until you comment and say hello. Always like to know who's out there. Want to share the love. And it's just always good to know who's out there. I certainly always appreciate it. I definitely miss uh, speaking in public, interacting with people in public. Can you cook? Good to see you, brother. Hope that life is treating you well, and that more importantly, that you're well and whatever is going on uh, in life. Um, hey, cuz, good to see you too, boy. Um, it's a blessing to have folk uh, in your life that can benefit from the good that you see and experience life to be, right? And so, we all have part of what's common amongst all human beings. It doesn't matter if you're male, female, uh, how you identify, in terms of ethnically or culturally. It doesn't matter what your financial status is, um, what your ideologies are, or any of that. Uh, One thing that is common amongst all human beings living on planet Earth is that we all go through things. Now we get to choose whether we grow through them or where we just go through them, or whether we go and get stuck and don't actually go through them. A lot of times we can get stuck in stuff and not really get to the other side. But the things that come up in our lives that are difficult, that are challenging, those things didn't come to stay; they came to pass. Okay, and so we've got to learn to navigate through those interesting times and those interesting seasons in our lives. Certainly, the last year and a half has been more than a year and a half now. It's been interesting on a global level, and really much longer than that, honestly. But there's there's a choice that we all have in terms of how we operate in the midst of whatever is going on externally, and that's by um, really getting in touch with what we've got going on internally and being very conscientious and intentional about that. And so our topic today is really dealing with personal transformation, dealing with shadows and self-acceptance. And as we're talking about transformation, there's a scripture. Uh, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you might prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. That's coming from Romans 12 and 2. And so, recently we were discussing how, like in Genesis, the story of the beginning, in essence, everything that God made was good. If God didn't make it, it isn't real. God made you, so you are real. And the things that are not real, though they may seem very real, darkness, evil, all of those things, though they seem very real, you have power over it because you are real. In fact, scripture says that you've been given power over all the power of the enemy, all those things which seek to dim your light, to separate you from your experience of connection with God. Okay, we were created to exist as vibrant beings with a sense of authority. And scripture says that we've been given dominion over the earth, and that doesn't mean that we abuse the earth. That's a mismanagement of responsibility. It's actually a gross misunderstanding of responsibility. We've been given authority to be able to command some things in the earth realm, because ultimately we're spiritual beings having an experience as humans, but ultimately we're spiritual beings in human form, right? Dwelling in these earth suits. But even while we're dwelling in these earth suits, it's key, I believe, for us to maintain the truth of the reality of who we really are. And so, the scripture says that not to be conformed to the things of this world. There's a lot of craziness that we see. There's a lot of challenges that exist. We're in this point now where, um, and we'll cover this more next Sunday. We're at this point now where we're in this season of moving into Halloween, which really is, well, what has Halloween become? It's become about ghosts and goblins and scaring the crap out of you and all kind of stuff like that. But what was the date really about? All Hallows Eve is the real name of this time. All Hallows Eve is about honoring those hallowed ones, the holy ones, those who were spiritual giants, if you were. And somehow, because of this kind of time of the year where the kind of shadows come out, if you will, if you see in my background, uh, the way that I look on the screen is the opposite of the way that it is in reality. So if you look in my, pardon me, if you look at my background by the couch, you see there's a shadow because this is so weird, because there's there's a window, and the light's coming in this way, and there isn't light over on this side. So the light is shining on the couch there, but there isn't light hitting it from the other angle. And so there is a shadow that's cast. And while we are certainly um, spiritual beings, while we are certainly beings of the light, if you will, because we are housed in this hue, when you shine the light on something physical, there tends to be a shadow that's created. And so, just like you see this shadow, on the floor near my couch that's created as a result of the light kind of shining in one direction uh, and not hitting it from all angles, we too have these shadow aspects of ourselves, right? In other words, we have these aspects of ourselves that, although although God's light shines on us, although at our core and our essence is light, is love and light. Phew. And that's so profound. That's so profound. Do you know, if you take the smallest physical particle, what's the smallest physical particle? Is an atom. And if you break an atom at its core is a little ball of light with smaller particles revolving around it. Just like in the solar system, an atom has what's referred to as an atomic sun, this little ball of light. And then these physical particles are moving through space, if you will, around that atomic sun. Just like all of these planets and moons and asteroids and cosmic dust, if you will, is all revolving around this star that we call the sun of this solar system. Even when you break down the smallest physical particle, at its essence, it's light. At its essence, it's light. And so is the case with us. At our essence, we're light. However, as we are having these human experiences, these experiences of dealing with this world, as crazy as it can seem sometimes, and I know that I've had times that haven't been easy, times that have been difficult to deal with, times that have been difficult to navigate, times that I, you know, would have liked things to unfold much differently than they did. But the reality is that there were some areas where I was kind of caught up in the closeness of the situation or the way the situation looked, whatever that situation might have been, and got caught up. And that's where the frustration and the grief and all of those other things come in, where the pain and the disappointment and the heartache and the heartbreak, the irritation, all of those things that that aren't really a good place to be, that aren't by any means at all delightful, not somewhere that we really want to stay and hang out for a long period of time. But as we were talking recently about everything that God made was good, including human beings, and said, this is very good, right? But then uh, the enemy, if you will, in the form of a serpent, came and said, listen, you should partake of this tree over here. Um, and whether you see that literally or metaphorically, what it's getting to is that, Melissa, glad to have you as well. What it's really getting at is that everything that God made was good, but feeding upon the idea or coming to experience something within one's perspective as being also evil. The good part isn't the problem, it's the evil. Everything that God made, God said is good. Everything that God made, God said is good, except for you as a human being. For you, God said is very good, right? And so human beings partaking of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is what the problem was. And then that was really just to get human beings out of a sense of feeling connection with God, to create a sense of shame, to want to uh, avoid the presence of God, which is where the real power actually is. And the enemy of your soul always wants to disconnect you from your power source, right? The biggest place that any enemy could ever be, it's not over in some other country, not over down the street. Greetings, Karen. It's good to see you. Good to have you here today. Uh, the biggest challenge is in one's own mind. Is in one's own mind. So we're talking about being transformed by the renewing of our mind, being able to see things differently, being able to operate from a different perspective. It is so much easier to blame somebody else for being a jerk, to blame somebody else for being the problem that we're having in our lives. And the reality is, if we're seeing somebody else as being a problem in their lives, what we're really doing is projecting our own stuff on them. That's not an easy thing to acknowledge. But we're talking about what? We're talking about personal transformation. We're talking about dealing with shadows, including our own shadows. Reverend Dr. Hill, it's good to see you today, my brother. Hope that you're doing well. We've got to deal with our own shadows. The reality is that all of us have baggage. The reality is that all of us have had life experiences that have impacted us somehow. And a lot of times we act out that hurt, or we act out that fear, we act out uh, that negativity in ways that end up being damaging to us. And yeah, they can be damaging to other people too. But this is a message of personal transformation. And so anybody who's listening to this, whether you're listening to this on the live, whether you're listening to it in a rebroadcast, this is about you personally being being transformed by the renewing of your mind, which doesn't have anything to do with what is going on in somebody else's mind down the street, down the road, on the other side of the country, or that sleeps in the bed with you, whatever the case might be, right? What it all comes down to is a sense of personal responsibility, taking responsibility for your transformation, the transformation that you cannot engage in on your own, but really need some divine support in that direction. And God is more than happy to be your strength as you seek to have a new and improved version of yourself and an upgraded experience of your life, right? And so part of that is that we've got to sometimes deal with these shadows that come up in ourselves. I can tell you that there have been times where I have been frustrated with folks and angry about situations going on in the country, in the earth. Sometimes I'm a person who believes wholeheartedly in the power of love. I believe that love covers a multitude of stuff that would keep us separated from God. I believe that love is the most powerful healing agent that exists. And as a person who has a very strong gift in the area of healing, I know that God is a healer. I'm thankful that I get to be used as a vessel of that healing, but I'm crystal clear that love is the tool through which the healing comes, right? And so I want to say for all of us that every time that we wallow in guilt and shame and regret and want to seek revenge on people and want to impose our will upon other people, try to control external situations and circumstances and other people. Every single time that we're doing that, we're stepping away from the truth of who we are. We're stepping away from our own power, and we're choosing to be irresponsible, spiritually irresponsible. We're being spiritually irresponsible if we're putting the onus on somebody else to do the work before we're putting the responsibility on ourselves to do our work. Now, does that mean that we just let people get away with stuff? Does that mean that we just completely accept the brokenness of the world and don't do anything about it? No, that's not what that means at all. But what it does mean is that we recognize that all of the work that we're doing is ultimately an inside job. It's ultimately an inside job. At our core is light. But the reality is that while we're dealing with the stuff of this world, shadows end up being created. When the light shines on something physical, a shadow ends up being created. And so, what do we have to do then? We've got to find different angles at which to shine the light. If the light is shining from all angles, there's no shadow. The master said, be mindful of how you're looking at things. If your eye is whole, if your eye is single, if how you're seeing things is from the right perspective, then your whole body will be filled with light. That's beautiful and powerful to me. If your eye is single, if your eye is whole, if how you're seeing things is seeing things from the right perspective, if you're seeing things from a perspective of what's real and true, then your whole body will be filled of light. And if your whole body is filled with light, there is no shadow. Okay. But we've got to deal with these shadows because the reality is that for most of us, we're not there a lot of the time. A lot of the times we're not there. A lot of the times we're playing the blame game, saying that this person over here wronged me. This person over here did this. And that doesn't mean that we don't have to establish boundaries. Absolutely, we do. Absolutely. It's important to establish healthy boundaries as an expression of self-love. There's some stuff that we need to say no to. There's some stuff that we need to not give our consent to. And the reality is that nobody can treat you any way without your consent. You might not say verbally, hey, you can treat me this way, but we teach people how to treat us. And sometimes, yes, it's necessary for us to establish some boundaries. Sometimes, and that's part of the inner work. I can tell you that's not something that has traditionally been particularly easy for me because I'm a peace and love and harmony kind of dude. That's where I like to flow. And quite frankly, I would much rather not have uh, to be firm with people if I don't have to, because if I'm to be honest about it, I want people to have the good sense not to do stupid stuff in the first place. That's a judgment, yes, but that's the reality of what goes on in my mind. Okay, whether that's right or not is the reality of stuff that goes on within my heart and within my mind sometimes. And so, because of that, I don't like to have to argue. Um, I don't like to have to set people straight. Don't get it twisted. I will if necessary, but I don't like to have to go there. I really would rather not have to go there in the first place. And so, I realize that it can be an uncomfortable thing, but I have to tell you, there have been times in my own personal life that no matter how uncomfortable it was to do that, or being firm with somebody, and people kind of see me as a kind of a nice guy. Um, Please don't mistake the meekness for weakness, though. That would be doing yourself a grave disservice. Um, you know, Sometimes people's opinion of you might change if you have to get a little firm with them, or if you're not giving them what it is that they want, particularly if they're used to that. Um, and that can feel uncomfortable. But guess what? That's your work to do. That's your work to do. Or maybe you might be on the other side of it. You might be really quick to give somebody a piece of your mind in a way that isn't even necessary, right? You know, there's scripture that says, be slow to speak, but quick to listen, and be slow to anger, right? Um, and so, sometimes, you know, my grandfather, my late grandfather, John A. Hall, he used to have a saying. He had a lot of these little sayings, but he used to say stuff like, "Every ball isn't a strike." Just because something's coming your way, you don't have to swing at it. Or he'd say, "You don't have to dance on every dime." Most younger folks wouldn't have any clue what that reference is, but there used to be these. I forgot what they called them now. Uh, I forgot what they called them now, but there'd be like these dances, and you pay like a dime. The gentleman would pay like a dime to dance with the lady. Um, and so these things were really, in essence, references for the fact that everything that's presented to you, you know, isn't something that you have to pounce on. Some things it's just important for you to use your discernment in terms of how you're addressing that. And so one person's shadow might come across as not wanting to ruffle feathers, and other person's shadow, um, or being really significantly resistant to that, whereas another person's shadow might manifest as really going from 0 to 10 really quickly, and giving people a piece of your mind in a way. And maybe in some cases it was important to set boundaries, but maybe it just didn't have to be at that level of intensity. And that's where discernment comes in. Some people can receive a message much more gently, and other people need it more firmly. And so really being able to navigate that is part of one navigating one's own shadows. Okay. Another thing I'm going to tell you, as a person who as a person who has been on a spiritual path for a long time, you know, um, this isn't my first rodeo by any means. I've been on the spiritual journey for a long time, and I've botched it up many times along the way. I'll acknowledge and own that. But as a person who's been on a spiritual journey for decades, I can say that there was a time where I felt like uh, there were certain places that I just didn't need to go. Okay, on my journey. And yes, it is true. There are places that we really don't need to go. However, it's also very much true that whether we think we should go somewhere or not, in terms of what's coming in our heart, what's going on in our minds. And I've got this copper bracelet on. Uh, Comes from scripture, Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. And it says, guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it flow all the issues of your life. And so it's important for us to be mindful of what's going on in our hearts. Okay. Um, what thoughts are you holding in your heart? What feelings are you holding in your heart? It's important for us to guard our hearts from bitterness and and hatred and resentment and jealousy and all of those other kind of low frequency kind of vibes and feelings and everything, right? But the reality is that sometimes those things do come up. Okay, I can tell you, um, when I was, ooh, this has actually been something that's been part of my experience for a long time. I think back to when my parents split up. I was like in the fourth grade. I was 9, and um, And I didn't actually allow myself to feel the feelings that were there. It didn't mean that the feelings weren't there, but I thought that at that time, even as such a young child, at that time I thought that it would be weak to have these negative feelings about my parents splitting up and family kind of going in different directions. And that actually was something that had been kind of inside of me on some level for a very long time. Um, there have been times where anger was probably the appropriate response, um, where I didn't allow myself to feel certain feelings. I remember a time, this is about 20 years ago. I remember a friend. Um, I really miss them. I'm gonna have to reach out to my friends, Rhonda and Aisha Molly. But I remember, um, I remember being asked the question, "What am I angry about?" Had been in this relationship with this person. Um, we weren't actually officially together at the time, but we were kind of like acting like we were together. Um, Although we were actually broken up. Um, but being the basically happy, kind of go lucky kind of person or persona that I have, um, I thought it was really odd when she asked me this question. She said, What are you angry about?" And at the time, my response was, I wasn't angry about anything. And so then she just kind of turned it up a notch and she said, "Okay, what are you enraged about?" I'm like, okay, we're going the opposite direction with this. Rage is like a whole another level of intensity of anger. I said that I wasn't angry, but the reality is that I was. The reality is that I was. The reality is that I was angry with myself for where I was allowing myself to be. Something that wasn't really that good for me. The reality is that I was angry at the other person because they weren't showing up the way that I wanted them to be. The reality was that I was angry with myself because I didn't love myself more to require more of myself and more for my life. And the reality is that there had been anger and guilt and a lot of other feelings that weren't really a very pleasant emotional experience. The reality is that the emotions were there. I just wasn't allowing myself to be in touch with them. We're talking about dealing with the shadows right now. Okay. I was in such denial that there was even anything going on that I wasn't really vibing with, because I felt like as a spiritual person, as a minister, as a person who aims to, and hopefully with some degree of success, inspire people and encourage spiritual growth and offer some level of spiritual guidance and direction to other people. I didn't feel like it was a very evolved way to be having this anger and all of this stuff going on. I would forgive people in my mind. I would forgive people for things that they had done and allow them to continue doing it and then continually forgive them, because I thought that was the evolved thing to do. And the reality was that I really needed to have forgiven myself first. Maybe there's some things that you need to forgive yourself on. Maybe there's some situations that you might be in a situation right now that you're in that you might find it easier to blame somebody else for being the problem or to being the reason that you're in the circumstance that you're in right now. And the reality, and I say this with genuine love, with genuine love. If we can't participate in any effect that we did not participate in the cause of that thing. Whatsoever a person sows, that shall they also reap. You can't reap what you did not yourself sow. And I know it doesn't seem like that sometimes. And I get that some things feel like they were imposed on us. If you take the position that that something was imposed on you, then you totally disconnect yourself from any power to change that situation. It's only in taking and accepting full responsibility that you actually get to participate in the transformation of that. We're talking about personal transformation, dealing with shadows and self-acceptance today, folks. And so as I was dealing with these, not dealing with, but having these negative emotions, I was, I didn't even realize it, but I was masking my pain with my spirituality. Now I've been blessed to be a vessel of healing for over 20 years now. For over 20 years now. And I know from just the work that I do that pain medication doesn't get rid of the pain. What it does is it blocks receptors in the brain so that the pain isn't registered. In other words, it covers the pain. Covered isn't really the word I want to use. It masks the pain. So it doesn't eliminate the pain. It just numbs you to its existence. It numbs you to its presence so that you're not really aware of it. And so a person, say for instance, a person has a slipped disc in their spinal column and on painkillers, well, person may end up having bone rubbing against bone or something, or maybe degenerated disc space, and may have bone rubbing against bone and may not feel the pain, but then engage in activities that actually cause one to further damage uh, those vertebrae in the back, for instance. And so one isn't feeling the pain, but that doesn't mean the pain isn't there. And that doesn't mean that a person isn't acting in a way that's going to create further damage. I realize, and I thank God for waking me up to become aware and pointing out to me that I had been masking my pain with my spirituality. And I was not allowing myself to feel the feelings that were there. It has nothing to do with whether I thought the feelings should be there or not. The reality is that the feelings were actually there. And I just wasn't, I was too busy masking them and I wasn't owning them. And in failing to own them, I was only damaging myself. And failing to own them, I was not able to show up as being as loving as I'd like to be, because I'm all about love. I'm all about that. And yet, I wasn't even allowing myself to be loved or let that love reach me, because I wasn't sharing my true self. Maybe my authentic self. I'll put it that way. You know, at the core, we're all light. I really believe that. At the core, we're all just like that atom. At its core is a ball of light. At our core is light. Okay. And so I felt like I shouldn't have been having those feelings and such. And so I didn't even acknowledge their existence. But in the process of that, just like the person on the pain medication who's got this bone rubbing against bone and engaging in all of this activity that's further causing damage, that's what I was doing. I was further causing damage without even recognizing it at the time. Without even recognizing it at the time. And so what I want to what I've what I've had to do, and I'm sharing this about myself because I've got a sneaking suspicion that on some level you can relate, right? And I'm willing to put myself out there if it will help you, if it can be of some service or some support for you, if it can help you to get set free. Okay. All right. And so what I started having to do was really owning the anger that was there. First, I was getting in touch with the anger that I felt towards people that I felt disappointed by, that I felt let down by. But as I dug deeper, and I had to own that I didn't even want to be angry. But the reality is that the anger was there. And I needed to acknowledge it. I needed to accept that that's what was going on and accept myself for having those feelings. Personal transformation, dealing with shadows and self-acceptance. I had to accept where I was, that was the stuff that I was feeling. And then as I was dealing with the fact that I was feeling angry towards other people, I had to realize who it was that I was really feeling anger towards, and that was me. For putting myself in the situations that I put myself in, allowing myself to be in situations that I knew weren't going to work out to my benefit, for putting myself last, and not including myself as much as I could have in those to whom I wanted to share love, right? Right? That was a person who really, really needed my love and my compassion. Uh, and I denied it to myself without even realizing it. And so I had to come to own that. I had to come to accept that. And there may be times where you feel, you're on this journey and you may feel like, okay, that was not the most mature way to have handled this situation. That was not the most mature way to handle this situation. I could have handled this a little bit differently. I could have handled this with with a little bit more grace, with a little bit more understanding, with a little bit more wisdom. You know, I didn't have to be so hot-headed in this situation, or um, dang, I had an opportunity to establish a boundary. They just crossed it and I let it go, whereas I probably shouldn't have. Whatever the case might be for you, own that that's your experience. Accept, yeah. Sometimes I get angry. Sometimes I get frustrated. Sometimes I feel disappointed. Sometimes I feel sad. Sometimes I feel hurt. You can perhaps relate. Melissa says that she can relate. You can perhaps relate to those things. But though those things come up, and perhaps they're not the most spiritually mature emotional states to be in. However, what is spiritually mature is to own that that's the state that you're in that moment, right? That's what the reality is within your experience in that moment. This is what's called shining the light on the shadows, shining the light on the shadows. Okay. And so actually before this video started, I was having problems. There's light over here. There's a window over here. But on this side, there was this side of my face was a shadow. Okay. Because there wasn't light coming from that direction. It was just coming from this side, but it wasn't coming from this side. And so we've got to hit stuff from all angles. We've got to hit our whole selves with the light, or shine the light on all of the aspects of ourselves, right? Particularly the areas where there's shadows that are being generated, where there's shadows that are coming up. And the shadows are those places of negativity, of darkness, if you will, um, where we're not really welcoming in the light, not acknowledging the light, ignoring. Okay. But when we shine the light, the shadows then disappear in the presence of the light being directed towards the shadow. Okay. And so you may have those moments. Acknowledge that that's the moment that you're in. Acknowledge that that's the moment that you're in and embrace yourself in the midst of that moment. The reality is, there is no self acceptance without dealing with your shadows. And there's no personal transformation without self acceptance. It's all linked together, folks. It's all linked together. We're all called to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. We're called to be mindful of what stuff we're allowing to enter into our hearts and occupy our hearts and take residence. Okay. And sometimes some hostility might enter into your heart. Acknowledge that that's there. Shine the light on it, because that's the way to dispel it. You don't want to mask it, act like it isn't there. Okay. And that is allowing yourself to enter into a place of genuine, authentic empowerment. It will allow you to be authentic in your self expression of who you are as a human being. It will allow you to be comfortable in your skin. It will allow you to be an inspiration to other people. And yeah, maybe some people would judge you because of your human frailties and your human flaws. There was a video that I watched earlier this week. It was a lengthy video, but there were different pearls and nuggets in it. This man very, very deeply loves his wife. Their story is phenomenal. There was a lot that they had been through. There was a lot that they put themselves and each other through, in their journey. Um, and well, and at just about the end, this man whose wife is dealing with having cancer in her blood and uh, trying to get transplant and things not working out with that, and feeling like her will is depleting, came to a point, and he was facilitating this meeting with some other people, uh, and he allowed his very human, as a man, he allowed his very human emotions to come to the surface. In an expression of humility, he expressed gratitude for the others who were there, gratitude to them. And there was something that he said that was so powerful that I had to post it on on social media, on Instagram. I posted it, and he said we've got to come to a point in our thinking where we realize that there's not weakness in being vulnerable. That the only real strength is in vulnerability. That there's nothing weak about being vulnerable. That there's nothing weak about being vulnerable. It takes courage to be vulnerable. It takes courage to be vulnerable. And first and foremost, that vulnerability has to come with yourself, being vulnerable with yourself, owning where you are, accepting that that's where you are, whether you think you should be there or not, but accepting that that's where you are, loving yourself in the midst of it, owning your error, owning where you have made a mistake or fallen short, owning where you cast the blame and as a way of a cop out for not taking responsibility for your own circumstances. Really owning that, sitting with yourself, forgiving yourself for that, forgiving yourself for it, having compassion toward yourself, realizing that every decision that you made based on the place that you're in at that moment. And those things, yeah, they may have been very much impacted by other life experiences that you had, that you maybe learned how to cope with certain things uh, at earlier points in your life that way, but now it's not something that's really just very functional. It's not really working so well for where you are at this point of your life, where you're ready to step into a new level of maturity and take new degrees of responsibility for your life and being all that it can be. And just really loving yourself in the midst of that, acknowledging your your pain, and loving on yourself, being gentle and patient with yourself in the process. And I'm not saying this like it's easy, it's not always easy. I stumble with it sometimes myself, but I can tell you that it's worth it. And I'm not now where I used to be once upon a time. And the reality is that you can't really truly, fully be compassionate towards another before you're really fully compassionate towards yourself. You can't really fully being accepting of another until you really come to degree of self-acceptance. And so I'm putting this out there that though it can be easy to pass the buck, I'm putting it out there that you, as of today, are making a decision to do differently, to love more fully, including yourself. Love God with everything that's in you. Love your neighbor as yourself. But in order to do that, you've got to love yourself. You've got to love yourself as as a child of God, as someone who's loved by God and accepted by God. Receive that. Take that in. Receive that. Extend grace to yourself and to all others. Right? I missed this comment earlier, or question, I guess it was. Do you ever have a delayed emotional reaction, like a delayed trauma response that presents as a shadow, lacking self love and boundaries? How do you navigate to feel your feelings in the moment and address from a place of self love? Oh, goodness. The answer to that first question is a resounding yes, for sure. Um, yeah, like that's been like the story of my life to a significant degree, or to some degree at least anyway. And as a person who's like ministering to other people, sometimes I have um I've eulogized in a span of 3 months. I eulogized two grandparents. Um and at the time that I was eulogizing my grandfather, or at my grandfather's funeral, I leaned over to my grandmother and said, listen, I was here 3 months ago doing this. I don't want to be back here 3 months from now doing this for you. And she agreed that she would be sticking around. That was in That was in July of 2015, and she's honored her word. Um, uh, and yet she's in a time where she's maybe going, getting close to leaving the physical realm and entering the heavenly realm. But um, I said all that to say that as a person first, whose kind of default setting is to be strong for other people, to be there for other people, you know. Um, at that funeral, I was trying to be strong for my grandmother and other members of my family. The reality is that it also was my grandfather who was laying in the casket. And I remember when he used to say years ago that he wanted me to do his eulogy, and I wasn't feeling comfortable with that. I'm at peace with it now, and my grandmother's expressed that when her time comes, she wants me to do hers as well. I also did, those are on my mother's side. I also eulogized my paternal grandmother. Um, but yeah, so my default setting is to be strong for other people, to be there for other people, to not allow necessarily my own stuff to come up while I'm in the midst of dealing with other people. And so sometimes trauma and uh, other things can come up on a delayed level for me. Yeah, that can definitely happen. And the way that I navigate that is by, when it comes up, when it actually comes up, or when I have quiet time to actually deal with it, then I deal with it. And I take it to God and ask for strength and support in dealing with it. And I acknowledge it, and I don't judge the feelings that come up. That's so key. I don't judge the feelings that come up. Whatever those feelings are, I just accept that those are the feelings that are there, and I love myself in the midst of it. And part of the way that loving myself in the midst of it shows up is, I might even say, I know that you're feeling this way. And you don't feel like this is the most spiritually mature response to a situation, or uh, this isn't a place that you like to go, but I love you in the midst of where you are. I'll talk to myself like that sometimes. The reality is, all of us talk to ourselves. Whether we acknowledge it or not, we all have self talk. It may be out loud, it may be in our minds, it might just be going on kind of in the background. But we all engage in some form of self talk. And I think it's healthy to find ways to express compassionately towards ourselves and engage in self talk that is actually, um, you know, where we're able to be gentle with ourselves and patient with ourselves and acknowledging. And that doesn't mean that we don't need to set boundaries for ourselves, because really, at the end of the day, the boundaries that we set aren't really for other people. They're boundaries that we're really setting for ourselves. I'm not going to allow myself to be in this kind of situation. That's really a boundary that one is setting for oneself. J Love, good to see you, my sister. Always glad to have you. So, in a nutshell, just to rehash, all personal transformation. Well, let me back up a little further than that. The quality and the value, the quality of our lives and the fulfillment of our lives isn't based on what's going on externally. It's not based on what's going on with other people. It's not based on what's going on in the world around us. It's based on what's going on in the world within us. And no, we are not islands unto ourselves. We interact with other people, we interact with the world at large. We're called to maybe not be of the world, but to certainly be in it. um, really the essence of our life experience is based on the quality of our relationships, including and particularly our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with God. But the reality is that we really aren't in touch with that until we're dealing with people. It's easy to be evolved and enlightened when you're not interacting with folks. That's where the stuff comes up, where we get an opportunity to see the rubber meeting the road and we get to kind of test where we are, test out where we are. And so the way that we end up engaging in that transformation is allowing our mindset to shift by dealing with those shadows, acknowledging the shadows that are there, primarily our own shadows, our own stuff, shining a light on those shadow areas, on those dark areas within ourselves, areas of darkness within ourselves that we might not even want to acknowledge even exist, but to accept that that's what's going on, to accept ourselves for where we are, shine the light there, love ourselves, and then to be able to duplicate that in our experience of interacting with other people, right? So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I thank all of you all who have been here today. I hope that this message has found you blessed. I hope that you were able to get something out of it that you found to be of value for you. I believe that with God, all things are possible. So even though you might have gotten tripped up 100 times, uh, it doesn't matter how many times you fall down, it's how many times you get up. Even though it might have been 1,000, a million, doesn't matter how many times you fall down, it's how many times you get up. But I think it's also important for you to be willing to live enough to risk stumbling. Okay? Really allow yourself to live, to interact, to be present with people, allow yourself to be vulnerable, allow yourself to really get in touch with who you really are and your essence, but also who you really are in terms of the lower aspects of your existence, and own that and be comfortable in your skin, embrace that and love yourself to the next level, right? And then when you're able to do that, do the same for other people. God bless you. I love you. I wish you a whole bunch of peace and love.